good afternoon, as Shannon mentioned, wherever you're joining today. It's a pleasure to have you here today. We're gonna go for a live webinar today, so get ready. Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna get my screen shared so we can have something to see and not just my boss, right? That's actually important. Here we are. So you should be seeing my screen in the next couple of seconds. There it is. Okay, so welcome again. As Shannon was mentioning, my name is Arturo Hamilton. I'll lead you to this small overview of management capability services and solutions of AWS and Azure. I know it's referred as Battle of Clouds. I mean, we're not putting anyone to compete here. It's just like seeing the two counterpoints that we have in both scenarios. I'm a certified trainer, folks. I've been a certified trainer for a long time now. And well, I'm also holding architecting certifications of AWS and Azure, 365 and security engineering, and well, a few other things there that I've learned during the last few years. Let's get started with something here, folks. We're going to start with a little bit of an Azure overview, then we will jump to AWS, and we will see how we can manage and learn a little bit about the different options that we have. Okay? I am Sylvia. I'm speaking. Shannon, can you hear me? Just double checking.
Yes, I can hear you fine. Is anyone else having any issues?
If anyone is having issues, well, I mean, in the chat because they won't hear me, right? But okay. So, as I was mentioning, folks, remember what we have on screen. It's a small baseline of Azure where we can actually build a platform with a lot of different solutions. I'm referring to Azure because of a Microsoft scope that we are starting with on this webinar, but it's something important that we need to learn from this specific first slide. Cloud solutions today can actually get a benefit and a power up from a lot of different sources. We can have development sources, operation sources, and data sources without having to get married to a single provider, without having to work with a single cloud solution. Today, it's so easy to connect and interact between two clouds that actually companies are starting to look at that option as the path to follow. Okay. In Azure, for example, as you know, just a sec because I have 3 monitors. As you know, we have a lot of features. The same features that we have in Azure, we have in AWS. We even have them in Google Cloud, in GCP. You want to create a computer, you got it on the tree. You want to create a complete private network, you have that on the tree of them. What I'm trying to say here, and why the reason is that I'm showing you this kind of content on our Microsoft Scope perspective, is that there is no longer that limitation that we had 5-6 years ago, where if you wanted to have, for example, an advanced data science analytics, you have to use AWS. That's something we didn't have in Azure. If you wanted to have an R Hadoop Insights cluster running for advanced machine learning, I'm talking about big words in here, you had only the option of AWS, right? Well, today, folks, that's no longer the case. We can actually, and that's why I have this slide to show you that we have features at a glance. Today, we can have maybe not the same exact experience, but we can have the same exact result. That's the cut of it. Okay. Now, in Azure, in Microsoft Azure, we have more than 60 regions. Before, if you have joined this kind of webinar a couple of months ago, or maybe 3-4 months ago, you will have seen an actual number there, a 66. But Microsoft decided that they wanted to throw away everything, spare no expenses, and now they have a lot of regions. So it's easier to put a 60 plus. We're above the 60 mark today. We have regions, virtually speaking, in every continent except the Antarctica. And I won't be surprised if we have something there in the future. We have 140 different countries with coverage. Hear me out. We don't have a region in each one of those countries. We have data centers optimized for some Azure services. If you're working, for example, let's say, take a look at South America and Africa. We don't have many countries covered today, right? What if you are connected from Egypt to Morocco and from Morocco to Spain, for example? You have edge points, data centers in Egypt, in Morocco. If you're connecting from Argentina, from Chile, from Paraguay, from South America, you have those options too. So we have regions, yes, but we also have edge countries. On the other hand, in AWS, we have 27 regions today. You can see here a little bit of a difference in both of our comparison tables. There are geopoliticals in Azure, and there are no geopoliticals in AWS, the pairs. What is a pair, folks? Let me give you a little bit of context here. What happens? I'm going to get dramatic here. What happens when there is a disaster, a flooding, an earthquake? Usually the communications of a geographic area will suffer an impact, right? If there is a flooding today, God forbid, we're going to have to do something for our services to continue in another location, or at least in another city, or somewhere that I can continue, right? Well, Azure works around this by creating something called region pairs. As the name suggests, basically what we do is like when we went on a school field trip, we have a pair and we just don't let it go. East US, for example, the one in Florida pairs with West US 2, the one in Redmond, Washington. If something happens in Florida, we have Redmond. There are a couple of things here that Microsoft includes that you could actually see in advance in some specialist classes about the distance, about the consideration of redundancy, but we have that in Azure based on a geopolitical division. That means that you know your pair will be on the same geopolitical, let's say, assignation. You don't have to worry about your region pair being outside of the United States, being outside of the UK. There are a few exceptions. Brazil, it's paired with Texas. So nothing to do there, but it's the only one we have. Brazil is getting a new region in, I think, a few days. So that won't be the case anymore. On the other hand, AWS doesn't do this. It's important. We don't have geopolitical region pairs. We have continuity and zones that basically are different data centers. But you could, if you want, or you could ask Amazon to pair your services regardless of the geopolitical divisions. That's a good thing and a bad thing. Again, it depends a lot on what you're doing. It depends a lot on what's the purpose of residency, independency, or whatever you have on sovereignty of data, right? That's one of the things that we have. Keep in mind, for example, that a region in Microsoft, in a Microsoft Azure solution, it's a pretty huge compound of one or more data centers. A single region could have 5, 6 different buildings. For example, the one in Europe North, that is the one on the shores of Ireland, has something called the Niantic project. Basically, Microsoft put an underwater data center just because they could, like showing off. And one of the data centers is underwater. It connects to a few other buildings around the city. This gives redundancy within the region. Amazon, on the other hand, folks, has something quite similar, but they call these availability zones instead of data centers. It's the same. The difference is that the availability zones could be shared between regions in Amazon. For example, if you can see the map, I know it's a little bit small, sorry, but if you check there, we have Oregon and North Carolina, right, on the east coast of the United States. Well, a couple of availability zones between them are actually not exchangeable or interchangeable, but could be used for some services in region A and for some services in region B. That's a little bit of a difference we have. So again, if we talk about geopolitical requirements, governance, compliance, sovereignty, this is a relevant thing, okay? Another option that we have to remember. And remember something important. This is like a highlight of Azure. I'm not cheering up for anyone here, okay? Hear me out. Let's be clear. But in Azure, our traffic from region A to region B uses a dedicated backbone. Microsoft has its own infrastructure for network communications. It's secured, encrypted, and the most powerful option they could have for us. Amazon uses public internet endpoints. If you go from region A to region B, your traffic will be traveling protected and encrypted, obviously, but in a public internet channel. That's one of the key differences here. So again, regulatory and compliance, right? Why is it so important to talk about the regions, folks? Because not all the services are in all the regions, regardless of the vendor, regardless of the cloud provider. An example, the size of the computers. We will talk about computers in a few minutes. You can create a semi-quantum computer with, hypothetically speaking, a petabyte of a hard drive with, let's say, I don't know, 128 gigabytes of RAM, just to start with, and you can have 512 different B cores on the processing unit. You'll pay $100,000 a month. That sounds like a deal. Well, guess what? You can only create that in specific areas. In Amazon, you can only create it in a couple of data centers or zones in the East Coast, in California and Oregon. In Microsoft Azure, you can create that in South Central and Central US, Houston and Chicago. So this is why it's important to remember that not all the things are available everywhere, okay? There are limitations. Obviously, these are given by how big your hardware, how big the data center is, and how powerful could be to provide some solutions, some specialized solutions. Okay, that's a thing. These are the pair regions that I was mentioning. Remember, the pair regions exist in both. Just keep in mind that for Azure, we have a geopolitical constraint. For AWS, we have no geopolitical constraint, but we have pairs in both. If something fails in region 1, we have our option to continue in region 2. Okay? In Azure, folks, we have the access management portal. This is one of the highlight differences between them both. As you all might have read about, or you may have heard about, or you might actually have used this during one of the last 25 years, Microsoft has the lead on identities because we have the Active Directory, right? The Active Directory services that we have used since 1997, a long time ago. Well, Azure uses the Active Directory technology in cloud. Amazon uses an authentication process based on identity access control similar to this technology, fully compatible with cloud authentication. That means, keeping it simple, that you can authenticate with an Amazon account or a user account of Amazon into Azure, with an Azure account of Microsoft into Amazon. The difference is we have an Active Directory by the words and the name like we know it in Azure, and an active management identity service that exists in AWS. Okay, that's one of the differences in here. At the end, we process the same kind of approach. We have identity management, online authentication, single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, access restriction, authentication process, conditional accesses. The features are the same for the identities. Role-based access control, that's a pretty important one. You hire someone to work only with an application. You are not going to give that user a permission to control the whole group, right? Just the application. Well, you can granulate the permissions for the application in both ends, AWS and Azure. So we're covered there. Just remember, the name of the service is the difference or the highlight in here. Computing. I brought a nice computing slide here about comparisons. Computing refers to virtual machines. Virtual machines is the official name everywhere. In AWS, we have a different name that some of you might be aware of. We will see that in a few minutes. But the core functionality is the same screen that we have here. Okay, we have a solution working in cloud, hosted by my cloud provider, Amazon or Microsoft, that I can interact with and control via operating system responsibilities. Infrastructure as a service is the same concept in both. You are responsible of the hardware. The hardware is speaking about the size. If you create a computer with 4 gigabytes of RAM and your service, your application, your business process starts suffering slowness or gets degraded, who's responsible? Microsoft or you? It could be both, right? But infrastructure as a service means that you were the one designing the storage, designing the size. Microsoft just gave you the options. Amazon just gave you the options. In this case, you are the responsible because the hardware, the size of the hardware you allocate was on you. And you were the one who said, I have enough with 4 gigabytes. So that's the thing with the computing. We will talk about this in detail. The same for networking. I mean, this is how the diagram is in the official comparison page. Sorry, don't get too big into this diagram. I'll show you a detailed one. When we talk about virtual networks, we have the same concept for both. We need something to virtualize my layer of communications within my cloud. How do you handle the network? The IP addressing, the segmentation, the subnet addressing, the masking, the DNS, the name resolution, the routing is exactly the same thing. Yesterday, for example, I was working with a customer overnight who is setting up a disaster recovery between Azure and AWS. They expose a public IP on a virtual network of AWS. They expose a public IP on a virtual network of Azure. They put a balancer with a traffic manager on the top, and they were able to reach both computers with both public IPs completely seamless for the end user. If one of the two failed, the other one will take the responsibility. No issues here. The networking concept, folks, is the exact same thing we have done since the 70s. The addressing, the division, the allocation, there is nothing that we have to change. There is a thing here that is the name, that we have two different names for most of the services. That could be a little bit of the difficult approach, if you will. We will see this in a couple of seconds, okay? We're back. Sorry, I repeated this one. That was my bad. We have the identity, as I was mentioning. We can a pretty useful option we have in all the cloud services. I don't know if you have seen this. It's called the MFA, or the double factor authentication. This is a solution that exists in both ends. You try to authenticate, and you have, let's say that you are the administrator of the virtual machines of AWS. You try to authenticate to one of the computers, and you see that your mobile receives a message. That's multi-factor, folks. I trust you. I trust your user and your password, but given the permissions, given the accesses, given the role that you play for the company, I need to double check that it's you. I need to be aware, or be sure that your credential never got stolen, or someone actually managed to snag a copy of your password, right? How do I do that? By sending you an SMS, by calling you and spelling a confirmation check, by asking you to use biometrics, use a fingerprint reader, use a face recognition software. This works exactly the same in both. Okay, that's why it's so important, and that's why we have this one, because in a real scenario, the double factor authentication is a fundamental piece of security. For our management, talking about management, we have it out of the box and built in into the directory options of both. So that's a good part, because you don't have to worry about, hey, this is a Microsoft technology, I need to extrapolate this to protect computers in AWS, I need to create an integration. No, both are valid simultaneously, if you will. Okay, that's another thing. The mobile services are also available for both. We have mobile applications in both ends. Here we have a little bit of a leverage in AWS. AWS started the hosting protocols of mobile solutions a few years before Microsoft did. So they have a little bit of a head start, and we get a leverage benefit using S3, the storage services for dynamic or static websites that you can use for mobile services. Microsoft is catching up there, okay, with Azure. What I'm saying here is that you can have in both an application, a mobile site, or something exposed without any difference for the end user. Since you're going to have something like, for example, application.service.com or application.company.com, that application.company.com name will solve to any of your two solutions. You don't have to worry, because that application.company.com will actually be capable of connecting to any of the two endpoints for mobile services, for devices. Okay, so this is one of the things that we got improved. A different thing that actually gets a process is the data management, and that's why we have here the specific word Azure. In Azure, my friends, we have in both, but in Azure we have an optimized service, if you will, that we can use to ask Microsoft to send me something that I can use to connect and ship back my things. Microsoft can ship to your office a hard drive or a pretty large box the size of a small fridge with up to a petabyte of space. So you can connect to a high-speed connection, copy all your data, and send it back to Microsoft. That way, you will actually avoid using the internet to transfer your information. You won't have to deadlock the bandwidth for your users. This is a benefit of data shipping that Microsoft has that AWS started implementing recently, 2-3 years ago. We have the two options now, but the data management here is improved because what's the difference? We can ship in Microsoft to any of the edge locations or offices. While in Amazon, as you know, the geographic coverage is not that extensive. So the limitations of this service are palpable, are actually noticeable in some countries. For example, in America, as a continent, we can only do this in the United States and Canada. We will get this in Mexico maybe in the next couple of years, and Brazil, and that's it. So you get some limitations based on the coverage. That's why it's an important topic to have. But both are optimized for big data. Okay? In both scenarios, we can actually work with big data services. Why is this important? Because the intelligence behind the data processing is a key for a successful business today, right? You need to learn from the behavior of your customers. And since we have so many options of interactions today using multimedia solutions, social media solutions and stuff, we could be feeding millions and millions of bits of information into a single repository. Both services, Hadoop Insights exist in both services and both solutions. Hadoop Insights is a third-party option, not Microsoft's, not Azure. It's not AWS. Sorry, yes.
Some people are saying your your voice is coming in jumbled and distorted.
How about now?
It sounds fine to me, but it looks like everyone is saying.
Just give me 1 second here. Let me see because. I wish it wasn't weird.
It's actually now bad for me as well.
Okay, so where am I? Let me see here. How about now? Is it getting better now?
No, it's still coming through weird.
Let me close all the stuff I have. Yeah, it's the network service, but it's not my headset. I'm checking if it's something here.
It looks like at the top left of your corner, there's a little orange exclamation point. I don't know if that's on Zoom or, oh no, that's in here.
Let's see here. Just a second. Let me switch to this one.
Sorry about this, everyone. Just give us a minute here.
There. Is it any better now?
It sounds better for me. Everyone else, are you able to hear clear again?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I switched. I think it was something with my Bluetooth, actually. I was using a Bluetooth headset, and I think I got too excited and walked away. So I think it should be good now, right? Thank you.
Yes,
thank you. Sorry.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let's go back.
Everyone.
There. So I was mentioning Hadoop is agnostic, okay? And that's a good thing because you don't have to worry about like, hey, I'm actually using Hadoop only on this service. Hadoop will be capable, even picture this scenario. You can send information host in Azure using, for example, a streamlined process for Twitter to catch all the tweets related to your company or keywords and push them back into Amazon. Hadoop will be capable of that. So you can actually have a cross-platform analysis whenever you need it. I mean, just giving you some scenarios, some options. At the end of the day, well, we will decide how to use it, right? We have containers. We have compatibility for Kubernetes. We have compatibility for Dockers. We can use Mesosphere. We can use Swarm. We can use a lot of different containers in both. Azure, and this is where the highlight is now, we have an optimized Azure Container Service for Kubernetes and Dockers. That is a Microsoft solution that is built over Kubernetes and Dockers.
AWS uses the native and pure Kubernetes and pure Dockers. What's the difference? Well, Azure has extra security with Azure Active Directory, while AWS has pure native compatibility with any open source or third-party service. So both will give you a benefit. Okay? We have finally, well, remember, we have the options to back up or continue. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is computing. Let's talk about the names because this is a highlight of it to wrap up the next 10, 15 minutes. Virtual machines are the same in both. What's the difference? The name. We have EC2 as AWS computing and VMs as Azure computing. You can see here a list of limits. Consider that the table that we have on screen, it's a table that refers to basic computing. The standard computing of a company. These kind of sizes will cover 70% of your needs. If you need a high processing computing, machine learning computing, let's say a GPU computing, imagine that you are analyzing the stock market or something, well, this will be enough. But in a standard approach, we have 39 sizes in Amazon, 40 sizes in Azure, just a difference, one of a difference. We have double the size in Azure for memory limits, but we have more capacity on the CPU. We have 20%, 25% more capacity in the CPU. So we balance the computing. At the end, as I said, these are standard workloads. The open source, folks, it's referred to Azure because Microsoft, well, you know, has always been led by the licensing process, right? Well, in Azure today, we can integrate any open source solution that we need. You can see there on the images. We have Dockers, we have Node.js, we have Mongo and Hadoop, things that I've mentioned on the last 25 minutes. Why is this so important? Because Amazon is natively, since the beginning, compatible with third-party solutions. But in here, with Azure, we have it too. Okay? If we want to map something, or we would like to have like a summary, remember that there are a lot of things that are exactly the same in both ends. The difference is how you call them. I'll be honest here. I started using Azure. 10 years ago, I started using Azure. The hardest part for me was the naming solutions. It was hard for me to remember, for example, resource management that you can see there at the bottom in here. It was a little bit harder for me to remember that it was called CloudFormation. Basically, what we have here, folks, it's the same solution to administrate our infrastructure. You can see here Active Directory, directory services, role-based access control, identity and access management. So it's the same. It's just that we get used to namings. That will be the tricky part if you have learned one of these. If you start from scratch with both for a co-management approach, you got everything covered, folks. Okay, so that's a good thing. A couple of comparison solutions before we wrap. This is a useful one to see where we are on each. These are the terms for the services, not for the solutions, the services. The computer, as you can see, is EC2 or virtual machine. The VPC is the virtual public cloud or the virtual network, is the same. RDS services is using SQL. ELB, Elastic Line Management Balancing, is Traffic Manager. Storage accounts are S3 or Elastic Glaciers. Multi-factor authentication, you can see it's multi-factor authentication, as I said. Security group, it's an endpoint. So again, the services exist in both. For example, in computing, you can see here the virtual machine, the EC2 is always computing. The computer, all the computers we build, folks, in any of the solutions, will always have a backend volume, right? Will always have a drive to host the operating system and stuff. Well, we use the EVS volumes. The marketplace is the same. The sets and zones are the same. The scale sets, for example, you know that you can create a computer that will add other instances if your workload gets clogged, or if you have a lot of traffic and the computer is not powerful enough, right? That's called the scale set. The scale set, folks, will let you actually add computers and remove computers on demand. We have them in both. This is another computing option that we haven't mentioned that you will be capable of using in both scenarios to scale to both. As I was mentioning, there's a little bit of a leverage on storage in AWS today because the way they host the websites. Microsoft just implemented that recently, maybe less than 9 months ago, but it's there now. The storage exists now as a solution in both ends. At the end of the day, you can cross-save your storage. One of my best friends is actually using that for, he has a multimedia company. Well, he works on social events and stuff. So in order to give redundancy to his backups, he has a storage in Azure and a storage in AWS. And he has a small script running in both that will copy whatever you change or update to the other one. This is an example of the transparent compatibility between the endpoints. Your network, folks, well, you can actually have, I'll be honest here. I always like to be honest on this kind of solutions and webinars. The network is the most complex part of the management from an architecting and design point of view. Both are equally hard. So that's a good thing, because if you learn one, you learn both. Okay, if you know how to create a communication layered solution from public traffic to private endpoints in one of the two solutions, you can do it on the other. We have the same principle of defense in depth and multi-layer network for both. That means that you can have a virtual endpoint that goes to a firewall, that from the firewall, for example, goes here to an internal load balancer, then goes to a jump box private computer, that then jumps finally to our storage. The same exact solution can work in both. In the middle, you can put here public balancers, traffic managers, host endpoints, traffic manager 2, DNS solution. So we can have layers and layers and layers. I'm mentioning this because the exact same kind of complexity principle that you can adopt in one, it's valid on the other. It's a best practice. Okay? The SLA, folks. This is where we have a huge difference. When I say huge, you can see here to here, we don't have coverage in one or the other. This 0.01 difference between Route 53 and Traffic Manager, that small 0.01 equals like 5 to 6 minutes of downtime or expected downtime per week. If you extrapolate that to a year, we're talking about maybe 300 minutes, 5 hours of downtime in Azure that you won't have on Route 53. I mean, this is just an example. And I'm not saying that everything is better in AWS. I'm saying that the SLAs are completely different. The SLA is the time that the service will be up and running, basically. Why is so different? Because of the hardware, because on how each of the two companies created their infrastructure solutions. Okay, that's why I'm mentioning this. You can refer to the SLA pages in both solutions. I'm going to show you here just to wrap up in a couple of minutes, but this is a key difference. This actually, folks, could be a decision driver. If you have a service that it's critical for the business that covers 4 or 5 different time zones that needs to be up and running 24/7 with less than 5 minutes of downtime a week, trust me, you could go to one or the other just because of that requirement. I recommend, and this is a suggestion because we don't have enough time in a webinar, this will take us a complete day. I will suggest, folks, that you take a look on the complete list of SLAs, the tables of the SLAs of each, because based on the service and based on the availability, you could start with one and then extend to the other. Both have subscriptions. Both will give you a direct subscription. One is called subscription, the other one is called account. The account admin, the global admin, the root admin is the same. The top user, the highest and most powerful user in your subscription. As I said, the highlight in here is on the Active Directory. This is a proof solution we have seen and used for, as I said, for 25 years. So we have a little bit of experience in our backs to support it. Nevertheless, and let's keep it real, Amazon has done a really good job with their own directory service. It's so well done that you have a seamless experience to authenticate with the guy in here or the user. Those are supposed to be users, sorry. I'm not a skilled mouse painter, but you can grab them both, use each of the accounts, and authenticating to Facebook seamlessly for the user with a single sign-on with any of this. That represents the level of similarities we have in both. Okay, a pretty important one. Satish, I think we can share it, right, Shannon? I mean, it's mine. So I think we're good to share it, Satish.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so get this there. And finally, the management, to wrap it up, because again, we have a lot of things here in a 40 minutes session. The management, folks, it's the same, if you will, from an enterprise perspective. You are going to try to automate, right? You are going to try to reduce the overhead management of a user. You're going to try to reduce the human dependency you have, right? You're going to try to have a visual mark to say, this should be paid by this division, by this stakeholder, by this budget holder. I'm going to use tags. I'm going to use resource groups. We have them exactly the same as design in both. Okay, so I highly recommend that you keep an eye on the management. Remember, folks, we have a pricing calculator for both in case you want to check how the services are built. Important, the price rates and variables to calculate are different in both. Okay, there is no similarity on how they calculate something. The final rate, it's quite similar. Okay, the final rate is not that different from one to the other because obviously, well, you will incline to something different, but we have calculators for both. Okay, so to wrap it up, my friends, I don't know if you have had the chance in the past, but I would like to introduce you to both portals. I mean, 2 minutes. This is our Azure portal. This is not how it looks usually. This is mine. I have customized a little bit of this one. Usually when you get here, you have something like this. Let me go here. You go here to the visuals. Let me go here. When you get into the portal for the first time, it looks like this. And this is not that. There. This is the standard Azure portal. Okay, you have your resources that you can deploy. You have the resources you actually created. You can see I've been creating some stuff in the last couple of days and a friendly portal. The AWS portal, folks, is called the Management Console, and it's the same. You have here your marketplace, your resources to deploy. You have here the resources you use, your services you use. For example, I have a computer running somewhere around here. And this can also be customized if you want. So I have my instance. You can see here, my service is operating normally. My instance is there in US Virginia. I have a computer here that I created yesterday running on the West US 2 in Redmond. So you can see here, I have information for the computer, information. Well, my computer has to be started because this one is a stop, but we have them in both, you see? So at the end of the day, folks, we have a pretty nice experience using both services. We will be offering a deep dive class of this in the future, folks. You'll see, and I think Shannon, or in the future, you'll get contact about it. There is a new upcoming class of 1-2 days for all these to be actually elaborated with demonstrations of deployment management, real scenarios and case uses. So folks, keep an eye up because trust me, those of you into multi-cloud approach will find all that advanced content really useful, folks. I really appreciate the time you took. I think we're going to go for a few questions. That's my corporate mail. If you want to stay in touch, you can look for me and add me in LinkedIn if you want. You can find me with my personal account. And well, for this content, I have nothing left to say. I just really appreciate the time you took to be here and get some time